Hi class, it's Bill here, continuing our multi-table queries talk. In the first video, we looked at basic concepts of joins. In the second video, we learned how to do inner joins and understood what those were, and we used the on syntax. Now we're picking up in this video with the concept of the using syntax. So we're still focusing on inner joins, but we're looking at how it works to do using instead of on. What's the difference? When do you use it? So the idea here is when you have a common field name between the two tables, as we do very often in the nomenclature that we tend to see, the naming schemes that they use in many databases, there is a common field name. So rather than having to use the on clause, which makes us repeat that, and usually to disambiguate it, we can use using in these cases where there's a common field name. One thing though that you have to pay attention to, they do require these parentheses. You'll forget them a lot of the time, but that's required in the using syntax. So yeah, and so you'll want to know that. Now, one of the things that you'll notice is when parentheses are required, it's usually because you can put a comma in more things. So if you happen to have a primary key on one side that was a composite key and a foreign key on the other side that was a foreign key composite as well, then that's why the parentheses make sense, because you could put a comma and list a second column. But that's very unusual that we see a composite foreign key. So, but the main thing is, with the database naming that we see, using is usually shorter. I prefer it because then you'll often make fewer mistakes, because then you're making sure that you're focusing on the one column that you need to. So I recommend always do using when you can. So let's look now at an example. We are doing the same thing we did before. In fact, I'll bring up my notepad and I will undo so that you can see on my deletion, this is what we did with on. Remember, we had to say pet dot, pet ID equals customer pet dot, because the same column name was in use. But in this case, we can say using, and then we can get rid of all of this, all of the equals, all of this stuff. All we have to do is remember to do this and put our parentheses there. So we're saying, hey, just join those two tables. Take what's in pet, join it to what's in customer pet. Here's the column, the common column name that I want you to join with. And SQL will oblige, and we'll see that when we go over here to SQL and we try our second example, this is going to be using syntax. I'll paste that in. I'll make a quick note for myself. This is the on syntax, right? But if I now execute the using, we'll see that it's the same result. It was just shorter. If you look at these two queries, I think you'll agree they're a little bit shorter. I think they're easier to read. It just says, hey, there's the common name. Go use that. So that's perfect, right? That works really well. So that's the result, right? We just add the using, don't forget the parens, and then you put the common column name. All right, so that's great. Again, common column name makes it happen. If it didn't have that, you can't use using, right? If there's not a common column name, you must use the on syntax or some other thing, but on is probably your friend. All right, so that's how you do that. All right, so again, there's going to be a practice here. If you want to, you can do this. We'll do it in class and we'll spend some time going through it and then looking at the results together and talking through the examples. There's another set of practices, and again, you'll see those results. We'll do that together in class. Now, one other little topic that's sort of going to come up along the way here is sometimes you end up doing a lot of qualifying, right? A lot of times you end up with a whole bunch of table name dot this, table name dot that. You'll find that you're using that a lot and your queries start getting really long. And if you have long column names, that can start getting really dense to read. But one thing you can do is you can always give an alias. And notice here that you just put the table name and then a space, and then optionally you put the alias that you want to use. Very often you'll see single letters used here, just one character. And then you continue on the same way, and you can alias the second table if you like. The neat thing is, if you've done that, customers C, join orders O, then everywhere where you would prepend, you would qualify with the table name, you change that to use only that letter. So everywhere where we would type customer dot, we now just have to type C dot and C dot here, right? And then C dot here. And everywhere where you would type orders dot, now you need to type O dot, right? So even on the earlier parts of the select statement where you say, well, I haven't even given you the alias till down here, well, yeah, it doesn't matter. The select clause still needs to use that, but the alias now lets you do these in a much shorter way. So when you find yourself qualifying a lot, then here is a good way to do that. Now it still makes your brain work a little bit on a simple query. I don't think it's necessary, but when they get dense and hard, then I think this is a good idea. Keep this in mind. We'll come back to it and we will need it for some of our queries that come a little bit later. There's a practice here. Again, if you want to stop, pause, and try this, then that's great, but you don't have to do that now. We'll do it in class together. All right, now we're going to look at another syntax, and that is going to be the natural query, right? And the natural query, the natural syntax for an inner join is going to be kind of an odd one. I would suggest you don't use it, but I do want to let you know that it exists in case you ever see it out in the real world. The natural join syntax says, hey SQL, please just go figure out how to do the right thing. You just say table 1 natural join table 2, and notice there is no other join condition that is described. You just say natural join. Now how does SQL figure out what the right thing to do here is? Well, it's not really mysterious. What it's going to do is it's going to match up any matching column names. It's going to look for any columns that match against the two tables, and it's going to join based on that data. Well, that sounds kind of brilliant, right? It sounds great because usually, many times, we have the primary and foreign keys named the same column name in the two separate tables. So great, it's going to pick those out. Well, but be a little bit careful here because it's going to use all column names. If you happen to have more than one column that matched, it's going to use both of those for its joining, which is maybe not at all what you want, right? Often you just want to focus on the primary key, foreign key relationship, but you might have others. For instance, it's not uncommon for a lot of databases to have some key tables have a timestamp column. Often it's just called something like timestamp. If that column happened to appear in both tables, it's going to use the timestamp column, and it's only going to match up things whose whatever other column plus the timestamp happen to be identical. That means that's not going to be good, right? That's not going to match the way you want. And in fact, the natural join might work one way one day, and then when they add this other feature to the table later, like the timestamp, all of a sudden your natural joins stop working because now they're matching up based on multiple columns when you don't want that to happen. So the basic idea here is don't use that in the real world, right? I'll show you an example of it, but just don't do it. It exists, but it's probably a bad plan to use it. You know other syntax that will always be guaranteed to work. So if you really insisted, let's go back and let's learn how to change this into a natural join, right? You say from pet, natural join, customer pet. You take out any sign of a join condition, right? Pet, natural join, customer pet. When we go to try that, here we're going to have a natural join syntax. Right? We're going to run that, and in this particular case it tends to work because we only have one matching column, so voila, here you go, it does work. But again, not a recommended thing, so I would avoid it. And so there is the example of that. All right, so I think I've given you enough warning on the fact that that's really not a good plan, so there's going to be an exercise if you want to do that. Again, we'll do those in class. The next thing we're going to pick up is another way to do inner joins, and I guess I've probably forgotten to put that on the hierarchy, but one thing that we need to know here is that in the really oldest days of SQL, we didn't learn to do things with a join type syntax, right? I don't know that they didn't exist. Maybe they didn't. Maybe it was later that this was introduced. But in the older way that I learned to do joins, instead of using the from clause, we're using the where clause, right? And it's called implicit syntax because you don't actually use the word join. So if it says the word join, that's pretty explicit. If it doesn't say that, then that is implicit, right? And you're putting this into the where clause. Why do I not like this as well? Because remember, we have thought of where as being really specific to filtering, but now we're really kind of clouding that clause, right? Now the where clause can do filtering, but it also can do this sort of joining business, so it's a little bit odd. So I don't recommend this either, but you will see this, right? Some people will just write things all the way this way because that was the habit, and so I do want to introduce it to you. Notice how it works. You say where, and then you in essence put the join condition right here in the where clause. You will need to disambiguate if you have common column names. So how does that work? Well, let's go look and see where that belongs, right? We want to do the same thing, but we want to use implicit. So now notice we're going to take out, right, any kind of join clause, join condition. We're just going to list the two names. Now don't stop here, right, because if there's no join condition, again, you're going to get something you don't expect, a cross join that's not going to be good. So continue on, where, and now we need to tell it how to match up the two columns. And again, I can't just say pet ID equals pet ID, because SQL will say, hey, this is an ambiguous column name. So again, I have to say pet.petID equals customer pet.petID. So notice the join condition has just moved to the where clause in this particular syntax, right? Now the result is going to be the same. If I move down here, this is implicit syntax, right? I run it again, I get the same answer, right? So it does the same kind of thing. Just remember that if you wanted to do now another filtering, right, now you'd have to do that here. You'd have to do something like and, you know, pet adoption date is greater than, right? Let's say adoption date is greater than, and then we'd have to use our 2017-11-05, right? So if you, again, we've sort of clouded up what where does, because where expresses the join condition, and the where also does filtering, which means we need ands or ors to do the whole thing. So we certainly can do filtering, but now it gets a little more complicated, right? It's sort of muddled in with the join condition that's expressed here. So that's how you do implicit syntax. Again, you will see this in the world, right? Sometimes you'll see a lot of this in the world, so you need to know how to do it. All right, so again, we're looking at the where clause instead of the from for the join condition. It's still there, right? But you just have to look farther. Right? There's going to be some practice on that. I want you to have at least that in your records so that you have an example of that. All right, so we're going to move now in a whole different direction, and that is we're going to switch our focus to outer joins, right? So in the next video, we're going to pick up what is an outer join, what's the syntax in SQL, how does it differ from an inner join, etc. So we'll pick up on that in the next video, but I want to stop here. This one's long enough. So thanks for watching the video, and pick up with the next one if you want to continue your exploration of outer joins in SQL.